Welcome to the SALISES 16th Virtual Forum. This forum is entitled Tracing the Devolution of the Carnival in Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome. We're pleased to have all the distinguished presenters and participants in this most important topic, very controversial issue in Trinidad and Tobago at this time, as Carnival is always about controversy. We hope that the context and the whole program is intended to create an academic discussion, bringing together town and gown, so that we can begin to improve our Carnival product. The objectives of the SALISES series is to demonstrate the capacity of SALISES through its academic staff and allied professionals to fulfill outreach services and encourage public engagement that adds value to discourses and decision-making deemed critical in positively impacting the national and regional development. That's the whole mission of the SALISES outreach effort. Specifically, this particular webinar deals with the Carnival product, which continues to respond to innovation, change, and especially international forces that are critical to its evolution with the passage of time. This forum provides formal information for professionals with interest in the Carnival brand Trinidad and Tobago. It also targets tertiary-level students in Carnival Studies, Cultural Studies, International Relations, Economics, Development Analysts, Administrators, and laypersons with an interest in Trinidad and Tobago's Carnival brand, as we continue to evolve locally, regionally, and globally. As we all know, the COVID pandemic has intervened and created lots of anxiety. And this year, the theme of Mother of ALL Carnivals has been invented in order to stimulate or regenerate interest and participation after such a brief hiatus, as it were. The Trinidad and Tobago Carnival brand has to prevail given its contribution to sustain livelihoods for individuals, families, and historico-cultural significance, and its capacity to facilitate greater equity in the distribution of household wealth. These discussions should provide food for thought in the face of advancing economic fortunes, in the presence of epidemiological risks and an uncertain future. The need to expand our economic activity in the non-oil sector becomes therefore very important, and culture as an engine of the economy needs to be developed and promoted. Trinidad has been called the Mecca of Carnival, and that brand has to be responding progressively with rational thought to the inevitable change processes. To this end, the panelists are expected to bring sober judgments, especially after the inebriation of Carnival, that mix and combine those with emerging from other public commentators to provide a broader vision for critical decision makers with administrative clout and the policymakers and those who invest in Carnival, with the capacity to assure sustainable futures for the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival product locally, regionally, and globally. With us on the panel today are Professor Anton Allaha, Dr. Marlene Atz, and Dr. Joanne Tull, who I will introduce prior to their presentation. But before I do this, may I invite Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, the Acting Director of Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, St. Augustine campus, to provide us with his opening remarks. So can I invite Dr. St. Bernard to give us his opening remarks?
Greetings, colleagues from the Indian Institute of Technology in Roorkee, India. I'm always pleased to be at the helm of these SALISES fora, which we have had since October the 1st, 2021, when I assumed the role as acting director of SALISES. It gives me great pleasure to begin this 16th edition of the SALISES Virtual Forum Series. And we have tackled many issues relevant to the development, not only of Trinidad and Tobago, but indeed the Caribbean, and in some instances, we have gone beyond the Caribbean. And based on our intervention in this regard, we now have a series of video graphic coverage of all our webinars that I am sure will find utility in secondary schools and in courses taught within tertiary institutions. It is our intention to continue spreading the good word of informed commentators, informed academics, informed scholars, who we continuously ask to grace our forums by making their formal presentations. Normally, we have as many as 6 presenters. Today, we only have 3. And I'm sure these 3 presenters, these 3 panelists will deliver sterling deliveries as far as, addressing the issue that is relevant to the Carnival product in Trinidad and Tobago and how it is going to emerge and evolve. And in some instances, there are concerns about that whole process of evolution and whether it is heading in the right direction. Not too long ago, I was actually reading a text from one of my Facebook friends, and there was a debate about, who should have won the road march, and that in and of itself speaks to, the changing dynamics that may be linked to the demography and the zeitgeist, that is effervescent in the Carnival product. So it is with great pleasure that, I begin this forum by inviting and thanking each of you for your engagement in today's proceedings. I know people have several other engagements on a daily basis, so we are always thankful when folks take time off to witness our offerings, and it gives me great pleasure that, SALISES, has that kind of impact in terms of some of what we do. And I hope, that those of you who witnessed today's presentations and the proceedings generally would think, that we have been doing well and it is of value to you and would inform, how you go forward with respect to your thinking on matters, your thoughts on matters, and especially those who are decision makers. We really hope that, our proceedings do jolt you in a progressive direction that would, at the end of the day, assure that social justice prevails in the wide and varied institutions where it ought to prevail. SALISES, as you all know, has units on the 3 campuses of the University of the West Indies, the 3 original campuses of the University of the West Indies, Mona in Jamaica, Keyville in Barbados, and of course, St. Augustine in Trinidad and Tobago. And all 3 units do host important events that I think, each and every one of you should be aware of and should, participate in if time does permit. So it is with great pleasure that, I make these remarks, and I think I can just say a few things about, what jolted, my interest in, having this item on the agenda for today. It is not the first time that SALISES has engaged in research and events that have, propelled discussions around the institution of Carnival in Trinidad and Tobago. Indeed, this has been happening way back in the 1980s when Mr. Jack Yearwood was the then director of what was known as the Institute of Social and Economic Research, ISA, the forerunner to SALISES. And there are still within the SALISES fold, documentary evidence of the proceedings of at least 2 conferences that will help to address all the various dimensions of the carnival delivery in Trinidad and Tobago. Since we have been having our forums, this is actually the 3rd installment of an event that is targeting the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival product. We had one in 2022 looking at Carnival and COVID Carnival in the context of the COVID pandemic and what the future would bring. We had one earlier this year, just before Carnival, where we had some of the key stakeholders making presentations around their thoughts. And now we have some academicians who have actually come to the fore. We have invited, and we trust that they will do justice in their delivery. I think I have lived long enough to witness the transition of the Carnival product in so many ways. I remember as a child in the stands seeing George Bailey and some of the other big bands, the Harold Saldanas, the Ivan McWilliam, among others, cross the stage. I remember in my teenage years, Wayne Barkley ruling the roost and seeing the Wayne Barkley band traverse the Victoria Avenue strip, which, as I was telling someone a while ago, that was the western fringe of Carnival. In fact, back in the 70s, Cipriani Boulevard was the western fringe of Carnival. Today, the Carnival is extending as far as just short of entering Diego Martin. That tells you about the growth of what we are talking about, and there might be something in it that is related to the demographics and other social currents that explain that. Not only that, I remember the early panoramas when the various steel orchestras performed without canopies and so on. I remember when the steel band ruled the roost on the streets of Carnival and everyone was pulling a pan or pushing a pan, whichever way you went, and so on. Today, those things are phenomena of the past, and we keep asking ourselves, where is it going? What form it will take? And notwithstanding everything that we think, I think at the end of the day, it's still a bit mysterious as to where we will end with this, albeit it has to be a product that we here in Trinidad and Tobago and all our descendants in the future can be proud of in terms of what the Trinidad and Tobago product would look like, the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival product would look like in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years. We have to continuously be engaging those discussions. And the one concern that I have is that we have really never done much to showcase the past. And as I look at some of the original stalwarts go to the great beyond, I think, we have to really begin doing something about that Carnival Museum and really making it a reality. So having made these remarks, I think at the end of the day, we here in SALISES feel that, we have a part to play. We do make presentations, that is the SALISES colleagues and staff members who are qualified to make comments in certain arenas. And at the same time, we do engage our colleagues in the rest of the university, in the various departments and campuses of the University of the West Indies. We engage them to be part of our mission. And also we also engage colleagues far and wide, whether in Trinidad and Tobago or beyond Trinidad and Tobago. And we have had our fair share of international personalities and scholars grace our forums, making presentations on various issues critical to the sustainable development of the Trinidad and Tobago, the region, and indeed the rest of the world. So having said this, I think I have said enough, and I should really defer now to those who are perhaps much more qualified to fulfill the requirements of today's agenda. So thank you very much, and I hope that everyone will enjoy today's proceedings.
Thank you very much, Dr. St. Bernard, for such opening remarks. And as we talk about the carnival product, there are always elements that are missing in the discussion, the design areas, the engineering, for example. But it is my pleasure now to invite Professor Emeritus Anton Allaha, who is the author of 14 books and over 90 refereed articles and book chapters dealing with the sociology of race, ethnicity, class, nationalism, and development, in particular in relation to the Caribbean and Latin American region. Anton is the winner of 7 major awards for excellence in teaching, including the USC Award in 96, 2002, and again in 2017. He's the only person to have ever won this award more than once before. So Anton is not only a scholar, but an educator of the highest order. In June 2007, Professor Allaha won the inaugural Leadership in the Faculty Teaching Award, sponsored by the Government of Ontario. So with us is no small customer, and certainly a colleague from my school days. I wish to welcome Professor Anton Allaha to the microphone. Welcome, Anton. Unmute.
Are you okay now?
Fine, great.
Okay. Before getting into my comments, I want to thank and commend Dr. St. Bernard on the magnificent job he has done as the acting director of SALISES for the past year and a bit. I really don't understand how somebody who is so eminently qualified can still be called acting. But that is just a little bit of confusion that I will start. It's also great to see you again, Layo. As you mentioned, we were schoolmates together at St. Mary's College back in the what seems to be Middle Ages now, although you personally look a whole lot better than I do, even though you are several years older than I am. But I'm going to leave that there too. My discussion today, I have provisionally titled, Carnival is we thing, but who is we? And a question, who is we? When Dr. St. Bernard asked me to make a few comments at this gathering, he said he wanted some sociological oomph. And then when Layo was speaking earlier, he said that Carnival is about controversy. So I'm going to say a few things that may provide oomph and controversy in the next 20, 25 minutes. I want to look at Carnival in the context of the sociological context of identity and belonging. I will use the Carnival lens to address, as Lionel said, my CV, and so address racial, ethnic, and cultural belonging, and to ask the rhetorical question, perhaps, about who is a real, true, or authentic Trinidadian. Over the years, as the society's religious norms were relaxed, as the biblical story of Jesus in the wilderness, of fasting in preparation for the Lenten season, of abstention, Carnival celebrations in Trinidad underwent major transformations. Indeed, Carnival has come today to take on a life of its own. Pre-Carnival fetes began right after the end of the Christmas season, and on Ash Wednesday, the party continued, throwing some disregard in the face of the religious authorities. The party continued in the so-called wash down at Maracas, Manzanilla, Mayaro, etc. Trinidad's carnivals run the gamut from the early impromptu and improvised Jamet-dominated street spectacles of the can brûlé and the tambu bamboo to the more modern extravaganza that is organized competition with big money prizes for expensive costumes and carefully choreographed presentations. linked mainly to the Black urban underclass, the social disorder and sporadic violence associated with Carnival and steel band in the early days was but a reflection of the disruption and violence that the colonial society visited on that social segment, the Black urban underclass. What is constant, though, is that when it comes to fete, Trinidadians know few limits. Thus, Godfrey reminisced about George Bailey and some of those others. It was a huge scandal back in 1966 when a Catholic priest, Clifford Hendy, transgressed all social norms and played mass with Angostura Starlith in Woodbrook. And the year after that, Calypsonian Mighty Cypher won the Calypso King contest when he sang "If the Priest Could Play, Who Is We?" So this is a big deal, Trinidadian priest playing mass, which was traditionally associated with social disorder and less than reputable behavior. As testimony to the entrepreneurial spirit of Trinidadians, Carnival evolved and became a huge profit-making enterprise. The once haphazard homemade costumes gradually gave way to carefully produced, intricate and expensive regalia purchased from special capitalist manufacturers as far away as China. This said, the point of departure for my reflections today is provided by a recent encounter where I served as an external examiner for a PhD candidate at the University of the West Indies. The dissertation under examination dealt with the politics of race, ethnicity, and culture in Trinidad, and the candidate on that day self-identified as a Black Trinidadian. In a telling exchange about identity and belonging, the candidate informed me that he did not really see me as a Trinidadian. Given the overall theme of the defense, I inquired twice whether this was because of my physical features or because I did not live in Trinidad. He was not able to give a clear answer. More pertinently, that exchange triggered a recollection of a heated debate in which I participated some years ago. It coincided, that exchange, that debate, coincided with the publication of a book by two Caribbean authors living outside of the Caribbean. The book was titled "A Comeback Home, Perspectives on the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival." Describing themselves interchangeably as Black and African, Trinidadian Ian Smart and Guyanese Kimani Nehusi traded on raw racial and ethnic sentiments in claiming ownership of the carnival for one part of the Trinidad population. The claims were made on behalf of those described as Black or African, while those excluded from national belonging were understood to be Indians, Chinese, local whites, mixed race types, whatever the heck a mixed race is. The latter's Trinidad ID cards and passports notwithstanding, they were perceived as less authentically Trinis. Thus, in a chapter titled "Carnival, the Ultimate Pan-African Festival," Ian Smart declares, quote, "Trinbagonians can rightly claim their festival as we thing only because it is a Black thing," hence the reference to "who is we" in my title. In their Afrocentric zeal, Smart and Nehusi also announced erroneously that Carnival was born in Africa and is the supreme African festival that belongs entirely to Black people. And regardless of where Black people are born, Black people in question are Africans. Africa, he declares, is home for all Africans. Smart charges that the Trinidad Carnival is, quote, "the quintessential African festival," while in a chapter titled "The Origins of Carnival," his co-editor Nehusi declares that the street parade segment of the celebration is symbolic of Africans reclaiming their physical, spiritual, and cultural freedom. Nehusi writes, "Possession of the streets was a sign of African, spelled with a K, possession of the self, a spiritual recollection with ancestors through millennia of cultural practice, a liberation through expression of impulses carried in the genes for uncounted generations," unquote. To my mind, this is sheer, confused, Black cultural nationalist mischief. But more importantly, the invoking of genes, carried in the genes, invoking of genes speaks directly to their biological conception of race, which we sociologists know as a social, not a biological construction. The concept of biological race is a dangerous fiction, for the blackest black can give a blood transfusion to the whitest white if they have the same blood type. But the blackest black cannot give a blood transfusion to another black if they do not have the same blood type. Why then define race by skin color and not blood type or eye color and so on? And in Trinidad, where, as we know, shade matters more than color, imagine the confusion involved in determining who is black. You see, the truth is we're all quote unquote mixed, and it is only the racist who thinks that there is a pure race and a mixed race. Indeed, I've never met a Trinidadian who is not mixed up, let alone mixed. But there's more. A smart endorses Nehusi's very problematic assertion, quote, Trinbagonians can rightly claim their festival as we thing only because it is a black thing, unquote. As noted, now some of these sentiments are echoed by people like Crow and Sugar Aloes, Mystic Prowler, Luther, and other Calypsonians, whom David Trotman refers to as the archivists of the poor man and woman. The intention is clearly one of racial inclusion and exclusion. For those who are not defined as black, which in this context means African, are not part of the we. It is the same unspecified use of the word we that is invoked by another contributor to the volume, Von Ulrich Martin, whose chapter is menacingly titled, quote, Coming Back Home to Take Home Back. The threat is reminiscent of the replacement theory trope by white supremacists in the United States, who grew very scared when Barack Obama became their so-called first black president. They had to take the black man out of the White House. Insecure white nationalists felt that their country had been stolen and it was their duty to take it back from the black invaders. They are the same white nationalist supremacists who marched the streets calling, quote, Jews and blacks will not replace us. That's the replacement theory idea. Thus, Martin catches my attention when he speaks, quote, of this thing we call mass, we thing, we carnival. Hence the we, who is we, as reflected in my title. On this score, as a kind of a mental exercise for us, I also wonder why one black parent, as in the case of Obama, makes one black, but one white parent does not make one white. And I'm also reminded of the brilliant Calypso by Denise Plummer, Whole Trinidadian. You may know that better than I. Let me be clear that while biological races do not exist, social races do. This is a Sociology 101 distinction that most people who speak of biological race fail to grasp. Nevertheless, while I may be perceived as an Indian by the PhD candidate mentioned above, I know little of Indian languages, cultures, histories, geographies, topographies, and gods. Indeed, Dr. St. Bernard is presently in India talking to us from there. I have never been to India. In the language of David Rudder and Andre Tanker, I am Trini to the bone. And it is now about minus 17 degrees outside. After 53 years in Canada, I still feel it deep in my arthritic bones. This said, I want to look at Carnival and Calypso a little more deeply and tell you why we thing is my thing too. In the same way Godfrey remembered his early days, I was 13 years old in 1963 with the mathematicians out there. That makes me 74. In 1963, when my brothers and neighborhood friends all played mass for the very first time with Silver Stars on the boulevard, as you said, the year they played Gulliver's Travels, and we won first place. Not them, we won first place. From that time right up to our late 60s in age, my brothers and I were Juve regulars in Desert Rats, where Dr. St. Bernard and his extended family were also omnipresent. In this context, when Godfrey asked me to make this statement, he reminded me of a statement I made many years ago, perhaps before Smart and Nehusi had published their volume. According to Godfrey, I had once declared that, quote, carnival time was the one time in the year when social class did not matter in Trinidad, unquote. If I did say that, and I had no reason to think he was making it up, I was wrong. For despite Calypsonians who have sung of carnival as a time of great social inversion, when one could see black and white hugging up, Indian woman whining, rich and poor drinking rum together, people falling down in the canal and so on, the unity was illusory. Among others, the carefree togetherness of the carnival revelers was captured in Kitchener's The Doctor Daughter, that brought together people from the white high-class neighborhoods like St. Clair and the black working-class neighborhoods from behind the bridge. The social reversals of those encounters highlighted the transcendence of social class, but only for 2 days. For by the 1970s, when oil money started to run, all social divisions were redrawn and images of poverty clashed violently with those of affluence. The excesses of dependent capitalism were accentuated and cries of black power filled the air. Once again, the public's perception of the national festival began to change. As in the early days, when religious Trinidadians steered clear of the national festival, many insecure Trinis now chose to exempt themselves from the Bacchanal, heading to Mayaro and Toco for the carnival, some even to Tobago and others to Barbados and Miami. In anticipation of the carnival frenzy and social chaos, those who could fled. There was a return to the days when the steel band and the street revelry was seen as socially unacceptable, lower class thing that attracted the shunned elements of the society. Earlier, Sparrow's Calypso Outcast captured the sentiment wonderfully. If your sister only talk to a steel band man, the family want to break she hand. Put she out, lick out every teeth in she mouth, violence and so on and so forth, Sparrow captured. Yet there were others who felt that they would miss Carnival for nothing. When Dr. Stalin spoke, the black man come out to party, that is part of it. And of course, Godfrey's favorite, Marshall Montano, in his Mr. Fett say, they call me Mr. Fett since I'm born and never missed one yet. But with the wokeness that followed Black Power, they emerged a class distinction that was colored black by folks like Smart and Nehusi. Those who had earlier migrated to the US and Canada wouldn't miss their carnival for nothing. However, earning North American wages, they were better placed to play pretty mass with the decent bands, the so-called decent bands, and the costs of costumes were not as prohibitive. Bands like Hearts, Tribe, and Trini Revelers were popular with the expat crowd, many of whom appeared to, as what we call in Trinidad, local whites or light brown skin or white by association. The not so subtle envy of those coming from abroad witnessed the development of an antipathy between those expats and the locals who played dirty mass and who were not shy to administer liberal dabs of blue paint on those in pretty costumes along Traderick Road, Arpita Avenue, and so on. As social inequalities grew, the days of safe mass were further jeopardized as serious drugs were introduced and became widespread among the youths of all social colors and all social classes. And as anywhere else, drugs were accompanied by guns, gangs, and violence. As the gang culture gained traction in Trinidad, the associated crimes like rape, mugging, carjacking, home invasions, even murder, were superimposed on the fact of systemic racism in our society and class prejudice. The ravages and excesses of dependent capitalism entered the carnival celebrations, and soon bands would hire armed security to protect their masqueraders. Sociologically, the social class byproducts of dependent capitalism were racialized and blended with the anything goes attitude that is so quintessentially Trinidadian. In conclusion then, Carnival and Calypso, with their race and class controversies, is the great mirror of Trinidadian society and have historically reflected Trinidad's social divisions. When combined, Carnival and Calypso is the arena in which struggles arising from these social divisions have been enacted or played out. As a capitalist society, where manufactured class divisions have coincided with those of race and color, race continues to be an important and sometimes overriding political factor. But although masked by the likes of Ian Smart and Kimani Nehusi, for me, the tensions of Carnival arise more out of class than race divisions. In the final analysis, Carnival remains the stage upon which the complexities and contradictions of the nation are articulated. And despite being historically controlled and manipulated by powerful classes to serve their own narrow interests, the Carnival voice of resistance has never been completely silenced. And because Carnival is about social reversal, it is characterized by ambiguity and contradictions, which allows it simultaneously to express ideals and their opposite. Thus, I made reference earlier in talking to Dr. McCree, Calypsonian Crazy, king of the double ententes, symbolizes both the ambiguity and the contradiction best when he's able to sing songs in praise of the Roman Catholic God, Jesus Christ, and without skipping a beat, turn around and sing suggestively about, quote, looking for a good cat to lick, unquote. Trinidad Carnival then is not an African, but a Trinidadian tradition, one which serves to encapsulate the fluid, evolving, complex, and multiple political, social, and economic contexts that define not only the nation of Trinidad, but its people. What may have been started by enslaved Africans in the French colonial context has now spread to encompass peoples, cultures, and traditions that are neither African, French, Roman, Catholic, or colonial. Carnival is not only about class and race divides and conflicts, but also about accommodation. And while some like Smart and Nehusi may dispute its racial origins and ownership, what we cannot dispute is that Carnival is about we, all are we. And I will end on that score. Thank you all for your attention.
Yes, thank you, Anton, for such a very clear and interesting presentation. It reminds me of the Valentino Calypso. After Carnival Day done and pass, people just go back to the race and class. So the only thing keeping we together is mass.
Brother Valentino. Yes.
Yes. So please feel free to send your comments in the chat. I think there's so much to discuss. The topic and the issue of Carnival Studies is so multi-dimensional that a session like this can only 2.5 hour session like this only capture some of the concerns and the areas. And we need to always remember that academic scholarship is very important to bring objective analysis and review of our reality. I want now to invite Dr. Marlene Atz, who's our next speaker, who's a lecturer in economics based at the University of the West Indies in Augustine. Marlene has more than 25 years experience as an economist, primarily focusing on the economics of sustainable development. She has consulted with regional and international organizations such as Caribbean Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, United Nations Development Program, among others. And she has significant governance experience in the private as well as public sector organizations. So I now invite, she's also a regular public commentator on national, social, and economic matters. So may I now invite Dr. Marlene Atz to the podium, as it were. Welcome, Marlene.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And I want to begin by thanking Godfrey, thanking Dr. Sen Bernard for inviting me to participate in this forum. It's extremely important, of course. And, I also want to thank Prof. Alaha for his very spirited and interesting introduction from the sociological perspective. I'm going to come to this from a slightly different angle, and permit me to say that Carnival is one of my favorite festivals. So I'm more than pleased to be participating, and I also ask for your indulgence. I have a bit of a post-Carnival frog in my throat, so you might get some croaking from time to time. I'm coming to the conversation today from an economic perspective. The theme on which Dr. St. Bernard asked me to speak is whether Carnival is in fact a sustainable product, and to bring some perspectives from an economist's lens. So my contribution is going to be in that particular vein. This is the flow. It's a very short presentation, the flow of what I shall speak about today. I think it's important for us to begin by defining what constitutes the Carnival product. I think there is a lot of confusion around that, whether Carnival is, one of the things that Prof. Alaha mentioned is that really the parties and all of those things start immediately after Christmas. But it really starts before then, because you have the band launches taking place July, August of the preceding year. And what really constitutes our Carnival, and what is it that we're trying to measure, and what is it that we're trying to sustain? So I think it's important for us to start with defining what is this Carnival product. And I'm going to attempt to do that, albeit from an economic perspective. I think it's important for us also, if we're having a conversation around sustainability, for us to look at the macroeconomic impact of Carnival. The microeconomic part is also important, but for us as a country, how do we sustain something if we are not able to measure what is the impact of that something? And then I segue into the issue of sustainability, again, from an economic lens. And then I end by providing some considerations towards a sustainable Carnival product, all of these from an economic perspective. I did a quick search online and was not able to quite find anything that defined the Carnival product. The first bullet point there is, it's something I was looking at the chat a short while ago, and really it revolves around Catholicism and, the Monday and Tuesday before Ash Wednesday in Trinidad and Tobago. And the event is known for participants' colorful costumes and exuberant celebrations, whatever that means. But that's a definition that I found online. From my perspective, and this is open for conversation, I think, we can look at Carnival, and what is provided in the second bullet point is really my own attempt at defining Carnival as an economic product. So for me, it's a multifaceted and dynamic national festival that showcases Trinidad and Tobago's history and our culture. Carnival, for me, has the potential to be a driver of economic growth and development in Trinidad and Tobago. And it also has the opportunity to provide sustainable employment. It has the opportunity for earning foreign exchange as an export sector and boosting productivity in the creative sectors. Prof. Alaha made mention of our pretty mass being imported from countries as far as China. That has become the reality. Many years ago, I was part of a neighborhood community where we actually sat and designed and made children's costumes. It was, it was a school band that I was part of in that regard. So we actually sat and we bought the fabric and we made, well, I was just kind of like the gopher, bringing this and bringing that, because I have no seamstress skills, so to speak. But I think we need to see Carnival as a potential fillip, as part of the conversation around economic diversification in Trinidad and Tobago. So that is really going to be the tenor of the conversation and the contribution that I want to make today. In terms of the macroeconomic impact of Carnival, I think we need to zone in on the economics of it, occupational hazard. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of what we do and a lot of what we say really needs to kind of, as much as the sociological impact is important and the social dimension of Carnival is important, and Professor Alaha in a very detailed manner shared some of that with us, I think we also need to look at the economics of this festival. And I did some quick scouring online and looked at the allocations to the NCC, our main architecture for Carnival, responsibility for Carnival, for the festival, and for executing this. 2016, $230 million, 2017, 168, 2018, 90 million, 2019, 140 million, 2020, 2022, of course, coming out of the COVID-19, a taste of Carnival, $15 million. And of course, this year for the Mother of ALL Carnivals, $147 million for the Mother of ALL Carnivals. And to me, those figures are important because there clearly is not any consistent allocation. And we hear all of the noise coming out of the various stakeholders for Carnival in terms of what has been given, what has not been given, how challenging it is. So we hear this and on an annual basis, all of these challenges. So So the economics of Carnival, I think, is at the center and at the heart of what is this thing that we're trying to sustain. Another part of the conversation is what I have in the left column. Injections into Carnival as well as leakages from the Carnival sector. How do we measure? And that's the economic term for what we put in and what escapes and what we call the circular flow of income. How much we invest in Carnival as opposed to how much we don't have an opportunity to gain from the Carnival celebrations. And a lot of conversations happen in terms of the economic impact of Carnival. It's a multi-million-dollar industry. You will hear all of these conversations coming in, but do we actually measure the injections and do we actually measure the leakages? Back in 2020, Minister Alison West in the Ministry of Finance made a comment that was carried in the media that said that there are significant leakages. There are taxes that we're not capturing because many of the private persons involved in Carnival either do not pay the taxes that are required of them, or we can't account for the taxes that they earn. So I think these are conversations that we need to have in terms of the injections into the Carnival sector or industry, as well as the leakages. I think we also need to look at the multiplier impact of the Carnival. In 2021, Bunji Garlin, the 2023 Road March champion, and I'm smiling because that's one of my favorite songs, contributions from 2023. In 2021, Bunji Garlin penned a song, and I think he's a consummate lyricist, called The Heart of the People. And since that time, I've wanted to meet Mr. Garland because I wanted to rename the song The Economics of Carnival. In that song, Bunji Garlin spoke of Carnival is a sea that's deep, but we don't know nothing about depths. You know, we follow old talk like sheep, but we don't know nothing about depth. And what Bunji Garlin was saying in that song is that Carnival creates employment from the man who is selling bottled water, man or woman selling bottled water, to the people in the car parks who are looking after your vehicles, to the people who are selling corn, right up to the people who are involved in executing major Carnival events. So there is a whole transmission mechanism. There is a whole multiplier impact of Carnival that I think remains untapped and not studied. There is a foreign exchange impact. And I think it's important for us to understand what is the net impact of Carnival. If we're to talk about the sustainability of this festival, what is the net impact of this festival on Trinidad and Tobago? So some of the multiplier impacts I've identified there: employment, foreign exchange, productivity, and creativity. I think Carnival ultimately highlights what our potential is in terms of productivity and creativity. And I think it is something that we can tap into and try to replicate in other sectors in the economy. So I want to share this here in terms of what I think are some of the macroeconomic issues that we need to look at as we try to talk about sustainability of Carnival. On to this question of sustainability. The literature says that sustainability must be a collective objective, all stakeholders. We have to want the same thing. We have to understand what Carnival is. And I come back to the point about having to define what is our Carnival, what is the product that we speak of, and what is this product that we're trying to sustain. Sustainability requires resilience. I think COVID-19 brought many challenges for us in Trinidad and Tobago and indeed the world, but it also brought opportunities. I remember marveling at our artists who reinvented themselves. So we had to deal with the exogenous shock that was COVID-19 in March of 2020. But shortly thereafter, our artists realized that they had to reinvent themselves because our artists and our Carnival producers, so to speak, are accustomed moving from one country to the next. That's one of the things that Trinidad and Tobago has given the world. We take our Carnival to the rest of the world following Carnival Monday and Tuesday in Trinidad and Tobago. Our artists had to reinvent themselves, and they, in large measure, rode the wave of COVID-19. So they had to show some measure of resilience because this was their livelihoods. And I'm using our artists as an example to say that if we want to sustain this thing that is called Carnival, we have to dig deep and to understand what will make our Carnival resilient. And going back to the slide that shows the contribution or the budgetary allocations to the NCC over several years, I think that is one of the areas, that is one of the pain points where we have to look at how do we make our carnival financially resilient, essentially weaning ourselves off the annual dependence on the state for an allocation. And of course, that allocation from the government is dependent on what is the state of the national economy, because if oil and gas, the energy sector, that is the mainstay of Trinidad and Tobago's economy, if the government is challenged in that regard, then it means that everything else is going to be challenged, and it is going to be a challenge in terms of what government is able to put on the table to essentially execute carnival in a particular year. And I want to make the point that I think our carnival, there is something in economics that we talk about Dutch disease, essentially making the point that while we have focused on a booming export sector, in this case, the energy sector for Trinidad and Tobago, we have not used the rents, we have not used the revenues that we earn from that sector to develop other sectors. That in a nutshell is what we mean by Dutch disease. And I think our carnival sector, our carnival industry has in fact been stymied in terms of its growth and its sustainability because of, and what I put in inverted commas, that Dutch disease impact. So what we do on an annual basis is that we wait for some subvention from the government, when in truth and in fact, if this is something, and I'm paraphrasing from Professor Alaha's presentation, if this is we thing, and we want to sustain we thing, then we need to find more sustainable ways to finance we thing as an enterprise. So I want to just advance some considerations for sustainable carnival product. I think it's important for us to measure the return on the investment, whether it's 147 million or 90 million or $200+ million. We need to measure the impact of carnival. It can no longer be anecdotal. In 2017, I was part of the Economic Development Advisory Board, and we started a survey looking at what was essentially the government's expenditure on carnival. I'm not too sure what became of those data and whether it resides somewhere, whether there is a repository, and what the data has been used, for what purpose, what kind of information or policy or studies have been generated from those data. But I think it's important for us to measure the impact of carnival, measure the return on the investment, because anecdotes, while they're useful and controversial and sometimes make for good bacchanal, I don't think they help us advance carnival as the kind of sector and sustainable sector that it could be for us. We need to measure employment at all levels. We need to look at the net foreign exchange impact, what we actually spend in terms of foreign exchange, because carnival is a high consumer of foreign exchange, as opposed to what we earn from foreign exchange. And the fact that we now have, normally we measure the impact by the number of tourist arrivals, and we've already started seeing conversations in the media by policymakers that, they're waiting on the data on tourist arrivals. This is now becoming, I don't think it is a sufficient measure of the impact of carnival, particularly if you're looking at things like hotel occupancy, with the rise of Airbnbs and people now looking for alternative forms of accommodation. And certainly when you have members of the diaspora returning home, they may not necessarily register themselves as tourist arrivals. So I think it's important for us to kind of move away, look at the multiplier impact of carnival. How does it feed into the rest of the economy, into the manufacturing sector, into SMEs, etc.? Bunjigarland's tune, the heart of the people. Carnival is a thing that is deep, and we need to measure it. We need to look at the resilience of the sector, particularly the financial resilience and the funding arrangements, which are inextricably linked to the overall health of the economy. I don't think it is sustainable for us to be looking only to the government of Trinidad and Tobago for funding for the execution of carnival in terms of the public sector expenditure, perhaps public-private partnerships, arrangements that have greater incentives for private sector engagement. And I'm not simply here talking about corporate social responsibility where your brand is put on something or is sponsored by. I'm talking about greater incentive, incentivizing the private sector to become more engaged in the carnival sector so that it can in fact be more sustainable for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, including the business sector. And the final point that I want to make at this time, and I'm looking forward to the conversations, is to review the role of the government to one that that looks at more of the provision of public goods, things like the preservation of the culture. There was a conversation in the chat again about the Carnival Museum, the upkeep and the maintenance of Carnival museums, the traditional art forms. Last Friday, for the reenactment of the Camberley riots, Dr. Perline Springer was talking about the need for us to inculcate in our education system this history, this important part of our history. We're here having this forum talking about Carnival as a sustainable product, but many of our youngsters have not fully understood the historical aspects of our Carnival and how it can in fact be replicated. And they will in fact be the policymakers and the drivers of Carnival in years to come. So looking at the role of government in terms of the provision of public goods, the preservation of the culture through museums, traditional art forms, and of course, government facilitating greater private sector engagement through appropriate incentives. Because as I said, looking at the numbers, looking at the variations in terms of the allocations to the NCC over the years, it clearly speaks to me, certainly, that this is not a sustainable financing part for something that we consider to be a significant dimension of the national conversation. So with those few words, I want to thank you for your attention and thank SALISES again and Dr. St. Bernard and his team for inviting me to participate in this very important conversation. And I look forward to the panel discussion. So thanks again.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Atz, for such a very macro and clear discussion of the areas we need to review. I think the whole issue of the Carnival enterprise needs to be looked at. And one missing factor is the whole issue of the competencies required to deliver our objectives. And often, we talk about wanting to arrive at a certain position, but we don't expend resources in developing our skills and the range of competencies required to produce the results that we require. Discussions in Trinidad tend to, get very heady and get very get very confused and controversial, as Anton would know. The whole issue of the bacchanal economy versus data and information, and the role of the media, for example, media, both mass media and small media, in facilitating discussions and narratives that don't add value. But
but I think we're by and large.
Yeah, the core issue, though, that Dr. Atz put before the table is the question of the financial model, the financial and economic model that we need to adopt. So far, we've been focusing on the allocations approach, looking to government to bail out or deliver or produce. Issues of investment, issues of the revenue and net income, the profit that we should seek to make nationally from Carnival is not yet articulated in a way that can be pinpointed. So I think Dr. Atz has pointed us in a very interesting direction. The arts and craft creators, for example, feel quite upset and quite ignored in this whole enterprise, because they are the real ones who produce the mass, especially those who produce creative products from their own energies and efforts and designs and so on. So there's an issue that needs to be looked at across the engineering field, across the financial management field. So now it is my great pleasure to invite Dr. Joanne Tull, who in fact is responsible for education. She's an academic, she's a researcher, and a consultant in creative economy development, with particular interest in festival statistics, cultural industries, development impacts, creative entrepreneurship, and strategy. She's written and published mainly in the area of festival and event evaluation, very important, and she's conducted and commissioned several festival studies on festival impacts throughout the Caribbean. May I now invite Dr. Joanne Tull to address us. Welcome, Dr. Tull. Can you unmute? You need to unmute. You need to unmute. You need to unmute, Dr. Tull. I think admin, she's unmuted, but we're not hearing her. The admin is still not hearing Dr. Tull. We're still not hearing Dr. Tull, admin. Okay, Dr. Tull, we just give you a couple of minutes to log in again.
Layo,
Yeah.
in the meantime, could I say a few things about some of the events that are coming up in SALISES?
Sure, sure.
Yeah, so while she organizes, I'll say a few things. Okay, just as we wait for Dr. Tull to come and make her presentation, I'd like to just inform the virtual audience of a number of events that SALISES has planned within the next month. On March the 4th, there will be what we call a SALISES Spotlight Lecture by one of our SALISES fellows, Dr. Priya Mohan. And you will see more of this being advertised. It has already been advertised already. Dr. Priya Mohan is a very prolific scholar in the SALISES St. Augustine fold, and she does a lot of her work in the area of climate financing, and she will be speaking about climate financing on the 4th of March. If I'm not mistaken, that is next week, Friday. So I trust that all of you will make the time once you can permit it and witness the presentation by Dr. Mohan. Of course, we have had 5 spotlight lectures thus far. Dr. Mohan, Dr. Vipaya Pari, Dr. Indira Rampasad, yours truly, and Dr. Robert Stewart, we all delivered spotlight lectures, which are like keynote addresses, and they more or less feature the work that we do in SALISES and how such work is relevant in the context of development, whether in Trinidad and Tobago, and in most instances beyond Trinidad and Tobago, because we address regional and international issues in our presentations. I also want to make you aware that quite apart from the spotlight lecture by Dr. Mohan next Friday, we also plan to host jointly with the NJAC a 50th anniversary Black Power conference, a 50th anniversary conference of the Black Power movement in Trinidad and Tobago. That event was meant to be held in 2020, but because of the pandemic, it had to be postponed, and it will now be held on the 20th and 21st of April on the university campus. It will be a blended event. There will be physical presence of presenters and an audience, but we are also extending it to the extent that it will be a virtual meeting as well. So it's a blended event, and we look forward to every one of you. Again, once you have the time to participate in that 50th anniversary conference of the Black Power movement in Trinidad and Tobago, jointly hosted by the University of the West Indies, spearheaded by SALISES, and of course, the NJAC. I can send again the call for papers. The deadline is next Monday. You can go on SALISES website and you can find the call for papers. And if you are interested, you can certainly participate in that event. And then come the 3rd to the 5th of May, SALISES is having its 24th annual conference. And SALISES is known for having a conference that is international in stature, and we expect all of you to participate in that. I see Dr. Tull is on, so I will make room for Dr. Tull to begin her presentation.
Yes.
And I'll say
Is
more
everyone
about this.
hearing me?
And I'll say more about this at the end. So thank you. Over to Dr.
Okay, thank you, Godfrey. Thank you, Dr. Sinbad. I also want to mention that Dr. Tull is currently the academic coordinator of Carnival Studies program, as well as the postgraduate diploma in Arts, Cultural, and Enterprise Management at the Department of Creative and Festival Arts of the St. Augustine campus. Okay, so welcome, Dr. Tull.
Good morning to everyone. Is everyone hearing me now?
Yes, we are.
Am I being heard or no?
Yes, we are.
Okay,
Yes, we are.
wonderful. Thank you very
Yes, we
much for the introduction. Thank you so much for your patience. I am happy to be making this presentation from in the Carnival Studies unit. For those of you who don't know that such a thing exists, based at the Department of Creative and Festival Arts, where we engage not only in the aspects of Carnival Studies to do with the sociology in terms of mass history and development, but even more pivotally for me, because it's my area of work, the business of Carnival. And of course, in so doing, we are certainly very much interested in some of the newer areas such as heritage entrepreneurship. So I have been asked today to speak on the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival Brand global impact in the context of threats, benefits for T&T. And I am smiling because I asked myself, how did I reach here? And hearing Dr. Atz's presentation, I said, but that sounds like me. But here we are, nevertheless. I think that what I have to say follows on quite beautifully, and I endorse a lot of what Dr. Atz had to say. I would also like to comment a little bit on the professor's presentation, certainly to say that it gave to me a very important point of departure for the discussion that has already been had, and I hope that I can add to it from this standpoint, speaking about this brand, Carnival T&T. Now, the first thing I want to make mention of is when we take a quick look online of Trinidad Carnival, I don't know how many of you have ever done that. Sometimes I have to, depending on the research that I am doing, and I forget, but I'm often shocked to see that it's likely to render the now familiar images of beautiful bronzed women clad in feathered, beaded, jewels, sequined monokinis, and swimmer-like configurations, a varying array of colors. And in more recent times, the costumes adorned on bodies that have undergone permanent cosmetic changes, to enhance their image, to achieve what is now called the BBL look. And I don't know how many of you know what BBL is. I leave you to research that. You might even be more surprised to learn a quick search of brand Trinidad Carnival yields not much more than that in terms of visual representations with particular focus on what are now considered the big bands. So when you look up brand Trinidad Carnival, you will see a similar set of images. One might wonder how this translates to shaping or harnessing a phenomenon that has been deemed as a unique product. And a recent discussion with one of the young emerging event entrepreneurs led to his comment being the only unique product that Trinidad and Tobago has in Carnival is that it is the only unique product that Trinidad and Tobago has is the Carnival, yet it is no longer unique globally because of neglect to its true essence. And I found that quite fascinating that as a young entrepreneur, he would give consideration to Trinidad Carnival as having what he considered to be an essence beyond what he has been part of or what he would have been experiencing. At the time of his comment, a full month of the carnival that was branded as the Mother of ALL Carnivals had already been complete, with a continuous diet of comments around the seeming lackluster of the carnival, coming, mind you, from the stakeholders, DJs, event promoters, and some of these people I work with as clients. And they said it doesn't have a vibe, something is missing. And sometimes the discourse went even as far as to wonder how this Trinidad Carnival that was considered the mother of all carnivals would shape up in comparison to the other carnivals, the mega carnivals that were coming up. For example, Jamaica Carnival, Barbados, Corcova, and Miami Carnival. And so this for me brings me to three questions. How did we arrive here? How did we arrive here? What is it that we really desire in terms of this carnival in context of the global happenings? And what is it that we can really have? What can we really achieve, or what can we truly aim for? Now, for my first question, how did we really arrive here? Well, branding has always been directly tied to marketing. It's natural. It's considered part of that field. And when you look across the region, much of the policy interventions around festival branding have tended to tie branding with marketing, destination marketing, tourism marketing. And that is a little ironic in the context of Trinidad and Tobago, which has never fully, predominantly pursued a tourism strategy, to say that Trinidad has as a major industrial-based tourism, as in the case of Barbados and, say, Jamaica. And if I may segue a bit, that is perhaps one of the reasons why the Jamaica Carnival, that is very much mimicked off of the Trinidad Carnival, has been able to successfully take off, because it is ensconced already in a national branding strategy around tourism. It was simply a matter of taking what we have in Port of Spain and just dropping it there, literally. And you will see that replicated across the world, to the extent now that we would even speak about new style carnivals. For example, what's going on in Dubai shortly, they've already started to advertise that. Dubai, of all places, there's going to be a carnival experience there very soon. And so when you look at the literature, you also see that there's credence to this idea of branding being something that is directly tied to marketing. Williams, in his doctoral thesis, a really good piece of work, gives a useful exploration of the ties between branding and export. And he particularly zeroed in on Private Ryan's Soca Brainwash event. Quite a fascinating event this year. I thought of Williams when I went to Soca Brainwash because of the direction in which the event promoter and owner took it. Interesting, not necessarily Trinidad Carnival in terms of perhaps what the young entrepreneur was talking about, essence, but All the same, it is considered one of the flagships. It's considered one of the things that draws people to Trinidad every year for Carnival. But even in the context of carnivals, where the heritage component is still quite strong or considered quite strong, Bethel similarly explores those connections between marketing and branding around commodification and looking at the Bahamas Junkanoo Carnival, which is a Christmas carnival, and makes the conclusion that this is something that cannot be overlooked. It's very important. Yet, it would appear that there are those who consider that branding a la marketing misses something. Barrett in 2017 questions the future of the Trinidad Carnival by giving reference to what she calls a copy and paste carnival. De Maida similarly raises the question by specifically exploring the extent to which we can still talk about mass, M-A-S, as opposed to mass, M-A-S. Of course, referencing the commodification, the over mass production of the mass, which meant now that we were losing quality for quantity. My feeling is that the overemphasis in practice, as has been, we were just discussing there, precludes a recognition of the carnival requiring a more holistic approach to sustainability. And for those of you who know my work, I think you know the direction that I am going in. I have certainly argued elsewhere that if the carnival is to be engaged and developed sustainably, it must be recognized as being ensconced in its own ecosystem. You can't measure, you cannot evaluate, you cannot strategize if you are looking at the carnival in a vacuum. And I believe it was last year when I gave a presentation speaking about connecting this idea of festival economics with festival ecosystem, to say that when we focus only on the carnival experience, it means therefore that we are really looking at demand and supply issues connected to that only. And I believe that Dr. Atz would have made reference to that in her presentation not too long ago. And so for me, when I talk about being ensconced in its own ecosystem, I mean that the carnival's constituent parts ought to be given consideration when mapping branding strategies to avoid the narrow lens through which visual representations of the carnival are currently portrayed. And this is considered most critical in the context of its sustainability when we talk about global presence. So let's talk about that global presence a little bit. So this global landscape in which this carnival now operates is quite layered. And if we don't recognize or appreciate those layers, it means that we can definitely fall short on branding. It's layered in the sense that it's now global, it's regional, it's diasporic, and then it's international. And in that regard, there is a tendency by which at the policy level, where there is a sense that the same way in which the carnivals were transported to these other places, that this idea of branding could be done in a similar fashion. I beg to disagree. And that is simply because if you take that approach, it is likely that you will be operating in a vacuum. It means that you won't see past the opportunities that your entire carnival within that ecosystem can offer. The other characteristic in that global landscape, which I mentioned before, is that there are innovations occurring, new style carnivals, which was, you can probably say, are part of your carnival spawning, for want of a better term. They are really competitors or have become competitors because, of course, they are pursuing the same market that you are pursuing. Which brings me to my third characteristic. One can easily speak now of a carnival tourist. And that carnival tourist is someone that chases carnivals. Some people might call them carnival chasers. And so they are always looking for the next best experience. And they have no problem leaving out a carnival to go to another one if that is considered to offer them more bang for their buck. Many of us in the South Caribbean will be surprised to know of the overwhelming number of persons that are going to this Jamaica every year now. Well, notwithstanding COVID. And of course, this desire to go Miami. And so we have to give consideration to when we speak about branding, what is this USP? What is this unique selling point that we have, that we are able to present to this global market? that we are able to present to this global market that would allow for that sustainability that we desire. I think in identifying those characteristics, it is possible for us to discern that in of themselves there are some threats, given reference to the term that was placed in my presentation title. You run the risk of being same old, and that comment came up quite a lot within this carnival season. I've not looked at my data yet in terms of what we did in terms of speaking with some of the attendees at events, but most certainly in conversation, that was something that kept creeping up. And so we also believe that this carnival makes us a very important socioeconomic impact. That's another characteristic. And Dr. At spoke a lot about that. But we don't know it consistently. We know it. Dr. At's kind of mentioned it. We know it because the measuring has been done. But the measuring is still shortchanged because the measuring has to go somewhere. Apart from there being repositories, it needs to enter that satellite accounting system that you can most certainly see now how this measures up against the other industrial platforms. You might wonder what that has to do with branding, but it has to do with branding a lot because measuring is knowing. And if it is that you have a sense of what you're really doing, what is your potential, then you will know the kinds of branding strategies that you can certainly pursue. So in this context, it is my view that branding is something that has to take on a holistic approach that is premised on what is believed to be the purpose of your festival. And of course, understanding that in the context of the festival ecosystem of the carnival. And branding in this regard should not therefore only speak to the triad, mass, music, pan, for which mass tends to be the predominant focus in those contexts, but should also give consideration to some other critical elements, the community, the artisan, which our host spoke about, the creators, the craftsmen. And most certainly, it must also look at the future of Carnival. And in that regard, I give a lot of emphasis to the community, youth entrepreneurship, heritage entrepreneurship, the digital economy. And in looking at those elements in relation to branding, it has to be that we understand the direction in which we are seeking to go. And in that regard, for me, there are really three elements that are critical there: resilience, success, and sustainability. If we take such a model or such a framework, it means that it does not lodge us only into the idea of branding tied to marketing, where there's that emphasis on PR and, of course, the social media aspects. Those are indeed important and will always be. However, if it is that we only go in a pedantic way as we tend to, it is likely that our mother of all carnivals, as we call it, will certainly be overtaken by its children. And whilst the children may not have a problem with that, I certainly do think that those who are part of the creation and the work and the development of Trinidad Carnival in terms of its true essence, if I may borrow from the young entrepreneur, it means that we will be doing a disservice to that carnival. And not just necessarily in terms of the now, but I am always about the future because carnival does have that potential beyond most certainly what we know it as to be today. It is an income generator. It is certainly employing me. It is important for training. We have seen the development of new strands of entrepreneurship. Heritage entrepreneurship is one. And I'm proud to say that the Department of Creative and Festival Arts, we pursue that through our old yard. It's social entrepreneurship. And those areas of entrepreneurship birth opportunities for development, research. Certainly the arrival of the Carnival Museum is something that we are very happy to have and to know, because that is another avenue and platform through which we can develop these strands of which I speak. And of course, more certainly, that is a new and innovative way of branding the carnival. So that I think that we have to look past the idea of marketing in terms of the traditional what would be the carnival tie to the sand, sea, sun, sex, having fun, because that's why there are those portrayals that we see. But to recognize that those festival ecosystem elements that we have all give those opportunities for branding, and we continue to overlook those, I think that is something that we must give some attention to. And I will pause there for comments. Thank you for listening. My apologies for the audio. We really tried today at the CFA, but we were having some drops. So I do hope that my presentation for the most part was understood. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that very interesting presentation, Dr. Joanne Tull. Dr. Joanne Tull, thank you very much. I think you raised some very critical points, the question about the need for a decision on the business and economic strategy that deals with Carnival. We need to develop a Carnival industry, and to develop an industry is an ecosystem in itself, in which there are many parts and many processes to be installed. You focus on the issue of the competitive reality, because the Carnival business is now international. So right now we are competing with other places who can produce the product that is more efficient, more desirable, and what are the requirements to produce that product. In terms of the branding and so on, and the marketing, you can determine what are the segments, the pleasures, or the Carnival product is a seasonal product. Unlike Disney and Broadway, where you have year-round activity. So we need to look at the strategy that looks at how we position ourselves in the market, because other centers may certainly overtake us in terms of their ability to be target specific and to segment the areas that bring greatest revenue and greatest satisfaction, while remembering altogether the injunction of Dr. Basil Matthews, Dom Basil Matthews, who says that culture is not show business. So that's an area that probably Dr. Allaha may wish to take up, But now we wanted to draw some comments from the presenters, from the questions that have arisen. Several questions have arisen in the chat. One of them is the question of what economic analysis is required to assess the contribution of Carnival to our GDP. I'm just going to read a few of them. The question of the issue of the identity issue. How can we use Carnival internally to look at our self-esteem, our sense of integration, our sense of cohesion? Those are two major currents that have been coming out. I also would like to suggest that the panelists can suggest a response.
Hi, Mr. Remy. Your mic was breaking up, so I don't know what you said after you started reading off some of the questions. I'm looking at so if you could repeat.
Okay, the first question actually came up is that Carnival is making to our GDP. How do we assess that, and what data is required to understand that phenomenon? Would you like to take that, Dr. Hatz?
All right, I'll make an effort. I don't know what data are in fact being collected at this time. As I said, when you look at the post-Carnival media reports, when different stakeholders are engaged, the conversation is usually around tourist arrivals, which while it is a useful indicator, I don't think it is sufficient for us to understand the impact of it on GDP. As I highlighted in the presentation, you certainly need a lot more data than that. You need to understand the levels of employment, the multiplier effect. You need to understand, the foreign exchange, the net foreign exchange impact, because you have balance of payments issues, etc. So it really is, I don't want to say a smorgasbord, but it's certainly a lot more data required. And I don't know if the NCC or any one of those other agencies have in fact been collecting those data, those kinds of data that allow us to assess the impact on GDP. As I said, Minister West a couple of years ago when she was being interviewed indicated that there was a significant amount of leakages. We need to understand what is being earned, and some of the conversation, I think some of the reluctance to share the information is because some of the information actually is dollars and cents. So you're understanding how much our promoters, our entrepreneurs are actually earning as opposed to how they're spending. It requires them to keep accounts and to submit accounts to the relevant authorities. And some people may not be quite comfortable sharing that information. So it's really looking at the receipts, the revenue flows from the carnival sector, the multiplier impact in terms of things like employment, the expenditure, and how it's really looking for a balance sheet, as it will, and it may require some kinds of information. So there is a need for us to rethink the financial model in as much as we want to encourage private entrepreneurs and private sector interests. There is a need for us to rethink the model. And I think that has to start with the government, of course, accounting for the spend on Carnival and what kind of impact it has had. There were some comments in the chat about, how do we transition from talk into action? And I think, I don't have permission from my head of department, but I think certainly the government, the Department of Economics, certainly UWI as a major stakeholder in Trinidad and Tobago, I think we'd be more than willing to provide support in terms of getting some of these studies done. But it is not something that we can unilaterally determine that we want to extract data. I think there has to be a framework within which the government or the Ministry of Culture and Tourism sees this as important, or the NCC sees it as important in the national interest, and provides that, brokers essentially the conversations with the different stakeholders. But I certainly am of the view, and there's another comment that was made, that it's not about money, it's not about dollars and cents alone. And I absolutely agree with that. And I was sharing chatting with the colleagues on the chat that it is not simply about dollars and cents, but dollars and cents gives us a start. It gives us a sense of what the spend is. And if we're talking about sustainability, we need to understand what we're investing in, and we need to understand what is the return on the investment. But there are non-monetary, as I was saying to colleagues in the chat, there is the intrinsic value, the fact that Carnival brings together communities. There's a social, I'm not a sociologist, so I don't want to step into an arena. There is a social dimension of Carnival. There's a productivity dimension of Carnival that it might be well worth our while examining so that we can replicate it in other areas. The song, and I'll just extract parts of it, we work right through Carnival, and it actually is going to be opportune and useful for us to document as a platform in which we engage different stakeholders and have meaningful conversations as to how we move the Carnival industry forward. So I just want to pause there. For a while as the conversation flows.
Okay, probably Dr. Alaha can deal with some of the sociological concerns. How can Carnival be used as an integrator in the society? What needs to be considered in managing people in the society, so we can have a more integrated society, a more stable society? What role can Carnival play?
Thanks very much, and thanks to the presenters, Dr. Atz and Dr. Tull. Your individual presentations were exquisite, and I must say I will go away richer than I arrived at the conference. I'm going to make about three kinds of broad responses The last one will address Don Basil Matthews' comment that Lio mentioned. The first is, in a private conversation with George Lamming a few years ago, George said to me that tourism is simultaneously our salvation and our condemnation in the Caribbean. Carnival is driven economically by tourism. We need to look at some of the social byproducts of Carnival and of tourism. And I think that what George was getting at was captured quite clearly by Watchman in his old Calypso, None of we ain't arrived as yet. What happens when the tourist comes to our country? What is the baggage they bring? Not in the suitcases, but in their heads and hearts. The whole selling of women, the demand and supply of drugs and bad behavior as byproducts. And what George said is that when there is a global recession and our economies are so tightly tied to outside people, the foreign tourists, then we too are going to get squeezed. It is in that respect, I think, that we need to be able to look at the Carnival somewhat differently. And with this, I shade into an observation by Dr. Tull, who talked about branding. Two of the programs I enjoy looking at on TV, don't know if we get them in Trinidad, The Dragon's Den and Shark Tank, programs that showcase young entrepreneurs trying to promote different aspects of their own wares. But one of the questions that the investors ask these young entrepreneurs, what is proprietary about your invention, your product? Who can copy it, how easily? And this I extend to our Trinidad Carnival. As was said by the earlier speakers, our Carnival was very easily copied and improved on by others, the situation in Jamaica, Miami, and so on and so forth. I have been to Carnival in Rio and New Orleans, and I could see unique things, different things that you will get in those that you don't get in Trinidad and vice versa. Now, Trinidad's Carnival has become so commercialized and adopted out, and in an entrepreneurial spirit, we now have Trinidad Carnival all over the world. The unique thing that we had with our Carnival, quite apart from the masquerading and so on, was the steel band. And then before we knew it, all in Japan, you have young people playing steel band and playing as good as Despers and All Stars and so on and so forth. So how can we, in Dr. Tull's language, brand that, take ownership, copyright some aspects of it, and not leave our Carnival and its products open to being pilfered or stolen? In the concern of Don Basil Matthews, culture is not a show business, it's not show business. This is a very profound observation because there's a fine line between putting your culture on show and making show business out of your culture. But the anthropologist in me wants to talk about the fact that culture is much more than food and music and dance and dress. Culture is concerned with our values, our beliefs, our prejudices, our attitudes, and so on. A society like ours, our economic value is that of capitalism. Our political value is that of liberal democracy. Our religious value is Christianity in the main, and so on and so forth. So when we talk about culture, it goes beyond the spectacle and the show business aspect. And it is important analytically to make that distinction in responding to Don Basil and his concern. I believe that to respond to Lio's question about the people, this is something that cannot be harnessed. And Trinidadians, more so than most in the world, are not harnessable. They will do their thing. They will improvise on the dance, on the song, on this and that, on the clothes, on the behavior. It is important then for us to find ways of marketing without having this idea of cheapening what our Carnival is about. the people must understand that it is not only about them, but when we go on the streets in Carnival time, when we go in the tents, when we go to the band launching and so on, we are all ambassadors for We Think. And I don't know, Lio, if I addressed glancingly any of your concerns. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Anton. There's a question here. What is our carnival? We must define what carnival is. Is it a procession? Is it juve? Is it a festival as a container of events revolving around mass, pan, and calypso? When we refer to carnival, what are we talking about? Dr. Joanne?
Yes, is everyone hearing me clearly?
Yes,
Yeah.
we are.
So carnival is all of the above. And if you take my theoretical suggestion about a framework of carnival having an ecosystem, it will be soon recognized that carnival isn't just about an experience, but carnival does have other constitutive elements that also encompass government, governance, regulation, entrepreneurship, research and development, all of the various persons, actors, as we would refer to them in international relations that operate within the carnival. I like to think of carnival in terms of some P's, practice, pedagogy, performance, because it's also about research in terms of training as well, development. It also requires community engagement. And I think that if we start to move beyond this idea of carnival being a procession and, just about this experience, I believe that we will begin to arrive at how all of us actually can play our role in the development of the carnival. You see, in the current model, there's this idea that government has to. And whilst government does have a role to play, I think there's also a recognition, as with all of the other sectors, yes, carnival is a sector, that there are other stakeholders within there. Media has a role to play too. When the media goes down to Port of Spain and decides that they'll only take beads and bikini, that's what the rest of the world will see. Carnival, I'm seeing my colleague in the chat there, forgive me, Dion. Carnival is also about intellectual property, trademarks, copyright. So we need to have a more broad-based, holistic understanding of the carnival. I remember years ago, some colleagues in agriculture, and I've always been fascinated with that piece of work because it ties into my festival ecosystem work. That by Williams, Garcia, and Procopi, where they developed what they call the carnival ecology. Quite a fascinating piece of work. And they showed how these three elements, or the triad as I refer to it, pan, mass, music, has spawned all of these various elements right across the carnival. And I believe Dr. Axe gave reference to one or two when she spoke about the fact that carnival has triggered the food and beverage sector and stuff like that. Garcia et al.'s work carried us as far as to the fishermen, fishing shark for the bacon shark activity within the carnival. And so the point is, we have to start with models. The developed world tends to do that. We have to start with models and frameworks. And we have to map out, based on those models and frameworks, what it is we desire. And within that, it has to be that we are continually evaluating that. And that evaluation isn't just about measuring, which is my favorite area, but that evaluation is also about self-assessment. It's really about even those within their own organizations, entities, enterprises, having models and ways of evaluating what they're doing to know where they're going. So it isn't just about what it is, but it's also in knowing what it is, what are we going to do with that? And I'll pause there for other comments.
There's another question coming up. What is the potential for earnings by nationals in providing skills in costume design, manufacture, project management in the arts, festivals and theaters? Has anyone done any analysis on the transferable skills and competencies associated with Carnival?
Right. I would say that it has been done to some degree, but not in a consistent, formal manner. So for example, when the National Training Agency would have developed with us here at the Department of Creative and Festival Arts, well, Carnival Studies unit, with the mass sector, the what do they call those? The skills. There's a CVQs, NVQs for carnival design. I don't know how many people know that exists. You would have had to do some tracer work. There was a labor study that I would have done, as a matter of fact, national vocational qualifications. Thank you, Dion. Right. I would have done a piece of work for, at the time, the Mass Band Association to identify what was the labor scope at the time. That's years ago. And so there has always been work in some way, but the problem is that work is always purpose for another purpose where Carnival is concerned. And so sometimes Carnival does not get that attention and in a consistent manner. And I keep using the word consistent. It's important for colleagues and participants to know that measuring is always done in some form or fashion. The challenge is consistency, coordination, structure, that it leads to results and implementation of whatever that data may give you. In terms of the potential, if it is that they want me to give a direct answer, I suppose the University of the West Indies and UTT, based on the number of persons coming in to pursue carnival-related studies, is also an indicator. And so my point is something that myself and the nurse always say, that data is everywhere, it's there. We always think that we have to go and seek primary data, but the data is all around us, in the sense that it's more that you have to have a strategic or nuanced sensibility of how you can go after that. And as I am saying that, if I may touch a little bit on the comment that was made earlier with regard to the collection of data, the National Statistical Association, CSO, would always collect data around the carnival, but they sometimes don't realize that other data that they're collecting is relevant to the carnival. So for example, years ago, I would go in there to get import-export data, and I would say, okay, what data do you have on stuff related to carnival? We don't do that. So I would say, okay, do you have the data for pan exports and imports? Yes, we have that. Do you have an idea of the number of people operating in audiovisual the businesses? Yes, we have that. So you see, it comes back to the question of us understanding what carnival comprises. And that's not something for just us to know, but that is something that has to be proclaimed almost. It has to be policied, that it then trickles down in the various relevant departments, so that when persons come to actually get the information to create the data, they're not lost. They're thinking, well, this thing don't exist.
But I believe to some extent, the university can play a role in guiding the society about the critical data elements, because that's the role of a university, to guide us in that regard.
Well, Mr. Remy, that's what I do. Most certainly, and we do continue to do so. I mean,
across faculties, across faculties. I think that
I don't know
total comprehensive strategy from the university, creating an agenda, a data agenda, a research agenda, that will guide the work of academics and intellectuals and people involved in the field, And maybe Dr. Atz,
you're talking to the converter, you're talking to the congregation.
Yes. Dr. Atz, you would like to make a comment in that regard?
Yeah, I was listening to Joanne speak, and I think it's indicative of what is happening nationally. There really is not much convergence in terms of getting. So she's saying the data are there, and the people collecting the data really don't understand the use to which the data will be put, and that is a challenge throughout the country. And yes, there is an opportunity, and I put it in the chat to the colleagues that I think you're correct. That is the role and function of the UWI. And because we have 7 faculties, I think there is an opportunity for us to look at multidisciplinary work. Dr. Tell made the point that, she has been in the vineyards collecting data for many years. But I think, certainly from what I'm seeing in the chat, I think there is a call for, our publics are calling for us to essentially not only mine the data, but essentially package it in a way that it can inform different stakeholders. So I think one of the opportunities coming out of the SALISES seminar is for us as the University of the West Indies, in responding to our national stakeholders, to perhaps put our heads together to see how best we can bring some coherence and coalesce around this conversation at Carnival. So I can commit to having a chat with Dr. Tull and to see how best we can advance this conversation so that today's seminar is not simply something where academics come and talk about their perspectives on Carnival, but we can actually bring something to the public space. So I'm committing publicly with all of the attendees in place that we can have that chat and we can see how best we can marry the economics and the social issues. And so essentially looking at the Faculty of Social Sciences, where I'm from, with the Faculty of Humanities and Education, where Dr. Tull resides, and see how best we can bring some of those minds together and to the national benefit, because I think that is our role and function as the University of the West Indies, to essentially to bring clarity to some of the issues that are burning national issues. So I will commit to having that conversation with Dr. Tull, and you can hold us accountable to that, because that is what the University of the West Indies is supposed to be, in a national space.
Just to shift a bit, probably this is a more sociological question. Have we investigated and quantified the impact on health, mental health, physical health, for example, hearing loss, backaches, UTIs, stress relief, bacterial eye infections, etc., as a result of the Carnival enterprise?
And this is an opportunity for us to bring in our medical sciences colleagues, because I'm sure they've also been looking at that, because as someone correctly said in the chat, it is not simply about the economics. I think the economics is at the center of what we do in this country, but there are several. The ecosystem is much more, the Carnival ecosystem, if I may borrow Dr. Tull's term, is certainly more than the economic, and there is an opportunity. So we can see, because I know during COVID-19, of course, while everyone was focused on the direct health impact, people getting ill, comorbidities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I participated in a conference that the medical faculty hosted. So this would have been like in May of 2020, when it was reeling from the impact of COVID-19 and dealing with the psychology of it. And one of the presentations was on the psychological impact of COVID-19. So we felt that having the daily briefings, et cetera, there was actually a mental health toll that is probably still not apparent coming from COVID-19. And while Carnival is a different kind of industry, I think there also is that. And I mean, look at the psychological trauma of some residents in some particular neighborhoods. Every year we hear about people complaining about the noise and about people defacing their private property. And in some of these communities, it's more mature members of the population, and it really is a kind of social injustice that they are in their homes and they feel as if they're being, held prisoner in their homes. So I think there is that opportunity for us to extend the conversation to other colleagues who might be looking at those dimensions.
Certainly, and so I think there's room for an inter-faculty approach, to the problem of Carnival and its potential and difficulties. Okay, Dr. Alaha.
Sure.
I was going to say, Layo, that you ask a question that concerns old people like me about aches and pains and backache and all of that. But there are, and this is part of what George Lamming was getting at, some of the social byproducts of the Carnival, the illnesses and so on. As Dr. Atz was saying too, some of the property damage that will occur, and we need to factor in the costs of repair before we talk about the profits of the whole thing. But there's one brief point I want to make along the lines that someone called Dion asked about putting together the whole Carnival industry with respect to the costumes. And the economists, as Dr. Atz would attest, talk about something called vertical integration, where every aspect of the costume design and making, the thread, the cloth, the this and that, and so has to be done locally so that we're not subject to the vagaries of outside shocks, outside shortages, and what you call supply chain issues. That is a mega kind of project when we can think of our carnival and the production of costuming, for example, is entirely Trinidadian. Even if it means that it's going to be more costly to get a costume, people will have enough patriotic allegiance to say, I don't mind paying a little bit extra if it's wheating, because this is, as my talk said, wheating. Thank you.
Dr. Tull, you wanted to make a remark?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. 2 points I wanted to make. First of all, thank you very much, Dr. Ads, for that. That is music to my ears. I think to my mind, in terms of economists, perhaps Godfrey would be one of the most invigorated colleagues at St. Augustine campus to want to engage with the carnival in a serious way of study. So I really welcome that, and I think that is something that the department would most certainly look forward to seeing. Let me also say as well, because there are some of the participants of that pilot here in this webinar, that the department was fortunate to receive a grant from the Caribbean Development Bank to train persons on how to measure and capture data for festivals and carnivals. And we were also partnered with the Bahamas Junkanoo to engage in a similar activity of training focused specifically on festival tourism. So I want colleagues and participants here to be aware that the work in terms of the research, and it was overwhelming. We actually had to turn away people. We trained over 105 persons from across the Caribbean. And it was a very intense kind of training. And the intention, part of our responsibility as a university, is to accredit those programs. And so I think, in all fairness to the UWI, we have been attempting to do the work in various ways. I believe that people should know that the father of the economics of culture here for us in the region would have come right out of the economics department, Professor Ralph Henry, and I now teach that course here at DCFA. It's important. We have a way in which we don't even document our documentation. And we need that. The economists will tell you need that to be able to track and to look at past trends. And so it's really useful for us to also understand that the way in which that connects the collecting of data also is very important to how we go about teaching people to fish then, for want of a better term. That's one. My second comment is a bit of a devil's advocate to the professor when he made the point just now about people wanting to pay more because it's wheating. Well, you know, professor, that's what the young people are doing. They perceive that what they are paying for in those large bands, I'm not going to call any band's name, is their thing. And that is something that we have to grapple with in terms of the changes in Carnival and the shifts in terms of how the newer demographics perceive the Carnival. It is not that there's anything wrong with that. I think, though, that some of us within the ecosystem have to recognize our responsibility to ensure that the other aspects are not lost. And one should not be in deference to the other. And I say this repeatedly. Anyone who's heard me present before, you would hear that I say these things. One is not in deference to the other, because yes, you're correct about the commercialization. That is very important. I will always be. But it cannot be that we laugh at it in the face because they are coming because they like what they like and they want what they want. Our responsibility, I believe, is to try to invoke a similar sentiment that you were mentioning there across the board of the carnival. The festival experience doesn't necessarily have only to be that you play mass. It may be that you learn to bend wire. It may be that you learn to develop a technical aspect for staging and sound, which is very particular for the carnival. I don't think a lot of people know that. You know, how you set that up for a carnival event is very different for a rock show or some other genre of music. I think most certainly when one look at this past carnival, if I may drill down a little bit, we need to go back to the drawing board and training in terms of logistics. We saw a lot of poor logistics going on, and that was because of the 2 years. No one realized that memory of the experience, and the experience of memory is very important to how you map out your events. And that is because of the nature of Carnival. When you as a practitioner, you are engaging in Carnival, you're also performing there. You're not just performing when you're on stage, but you're also performing behind the scenes. And part of that experience requires memory and the experience of memory. And so it comes right back for me to my point about the importance of training and development and research and development, not just because I'm a university lecturer, but it just always seems to get back to that, because that is a critical part of sustainability and development from my standpoint. And I'll pause there for this.
Very much. Dr. Atz, I think someone said we're missing the boat. Trinidad has a very strong manufacturing industry, but unfortunately doesn't extend their reach into the cultural sector. How can we integrate the manufacturing sector into the cultural sector?
You know, it's interesting that you zoned in on that, because it's one of the reasons that I suggested a public-private partnership, because there are efficiencies and modus operandi in the private sector, that we may be able to transfer to creating Carnival. I heard Dr. Tull making the point about logistics. I think very often people don't understand, and it comes back to Bundy's song, The Heart of the People. People don't understand that there are supply chain management issues and logistics management, because we simply turn up at an event. There's health and safety, security. There are a whole host of services and expertise and skills required around executing any kind of carnival event, including the parade of the bands, downtown or in the savannah, or as the case might be. So I think it's really an opportunity for us to pull all of the constituent elements together and present. And it also actually informs workforce planning. Of course, I'm going back as an economist. We keep not understanding that there's so many other skills and professions that we can train our students in, that, but we don't market it appropriately. So I think as an economist, there's an opportunity for us to study the economics of Carnival and to come up with some kind of documentation. Of course, the sociologists, the medical practitioners, Dr. Tull, who specializes in Carnival Studies, the logistician, the engineer, not too sure if I pronounced that right, but persons who are engaged in logistics, enterprise risk management, because executing Carnival as an enterprise will bring with it a whole host of risks. How do you manage the risk that the costumes that you're importing, the bikini and beads or whatever it is you're importing, that they don't arrive on time? COVID-19 has changed the way in which supply chain issues are managed and logistics are managed throughout the world. Do we go near shore, offshore? How do we create buffers to essentially insulate ourselves and to manage those risks associated with the execution of the enterprise that is Carnival? So I think there are opportunities for us. I think, as you said, Chair, opportunities for multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary work on the campus. I want to repeat that I will take the opportunity. And in my younger days, one of the things we used to have our students do is to go out at Carnival time and collect data, some basic kinds of data for us, so that we got a sense of what was happening. Someone made the point that CSO, they can't be all things to all persons, but clearly I think there is an opportunity for us to intervene to kind of help guide them, the uses to which the data they collect will be put to inform national policy of different kinds, including for the Carnival industry. I have to run off now, so I just wanted to thank Dr. St. Bernard and the SALISES team again, to thank you, Chair, to thank the other panelists for allowing me the space to contribute to this conversation. And Dr. Tull and I certainly will have some things to chat about, so that we can at least start the process of bringing something to bear in terms of what the national community clearly is asking for, and what we need to kind of guide our policy in terms of Carnival moving forward. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I wonder whether there's any room for bringing professors of practice, practitioners of Carnival into the university to do training? You know, the people who really do things in the creative sector, can they be engaged in the university to teach students directly out of there? And can students also go to their facilities for practicums and so on? Is that in contemplation in the program at the university at present? Dr. Tull?
Mr. Remy, we do that all the time. At the
In all-
Department of Creative and Festival Arts, we do that at this. Since I have been here, our students, all have, some of them are in the chat. They have always gone out and engaged with those in the carnival. There's a course called Festival Project where they must work with a community, and the project has to be a festival, like it's either entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship, and it is about learning and engaging. There's also a course called Enterprise Internships for the Arts, where they're actually placed across the sector and they work within the sector. The Festival Project course encourages them to be entrepreneurial. There are many people who have created their own businesses on account of that. And then our Arts, Culture, and Enterprise Management course also encourages, the postgraduate program also encourages that, as well as the SIDEN. So that, and across, outside of the Carnival Studies program, the theater program, dance, music, visual arts has always found ways to engage with the masters. We've had Masters of Arts programs. We've had visiting professors, visiting Masters of the Arts. This has always been a part of our pedagogy because we believe that practice is very important and that it is not necessarily only the theory, but you must engage in the real. Most certainly for my courses, you are thrown on the deep end. I've had my students have worked in Soca Monarch and all kinds of things, and it does not matter whether it's a long season or a short season. It is that you have to have
the question coming here. What would be the role of the Carnival Institute and other groups in to help in the longevity of Trinidad and Tobago Carnival? Rita?
That you were interrupting me to give the question to someone else. Very critical. Not just the Carnival Institute, but also the I think it's Heritage National Trust. I'm going to put a plug again for the museum. All of these entities, as a matter of fact, we are going to be doing work with the museum very soon. And the reason for this is that I think that point I was making about heritage entrepreneurship is there's a dynamic way in which we in Trinidad and Tobago can really engage that through partnerships with the institutions, because the institutions have some policy frameworks. Okay, we may not be very happy with it, but there's something that exists. And I think that we as a university using, I shouldn't say the word use, engaging our students in such arrangements can help to further and deepen those things. And one of my critical or very important areas for me is youth entrepreneurship. I see it every day in the carnival, particularly just before COVID. That carnival, we saw a lot of young, new upcoming entrepreneurs coming up, and they've hung in for the 2 years of COVID, and they're still with us. And so I think we have to reach a place where we see innovation as very much tied to the digital environment and technology to really advance some of what you're mentioning there. A lot of what we talk about there is very much in the absence of that. And even for us at the university, we also have to reach that tier. We're not perfect at all, but most certainly I'm happy to share with you what we have been doing in these contexts of which we speak.
Right. Dr. Alaha, Professor Alaha, would you like to expand on any of your concerns?
Really, I don't. I think that all of the key issues have been touched on, some more surface-wise, some more in-depth, and the two presenters have done a marvelous job. And you too, Lio, your moderation has been exquisite, very professional. I thank all of the participants, both on the screen and off the screen. Godfrey, SALISES, and Josanne also, and Elsa. So I just want to say very, very much thank you. I am delighted to have been part of this.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Allaha. And now I wish to invite Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, Acting Director of SALISES, to give us his closing remarks. Dr. St. Bernard?
Actually, there's a vote of thanks before I come on. By Ms. Darren Carter-Rennie.
I'm sorry, Darren. Darren, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Not a problem, Mr. Remy. Thank you for the introduction. Good day. I think it's good day. Yeah, good day to everyone in attendance. I would like to say a sincere thank you to all the panelists for agreeing to participate in the 16th edition of SALISES UWI's Virtual Forum and for their very informative and insightful presentations. Professor Anton Allaha, Dr. Marlene Axe, and Dr. Joanne Tull. Special thanks to all the staff involved who worked assiduously in the planning of the event, Ms. Katian Modest, Mr. Ephraim Thompson, Ms. Elsa Hamilton, Mr. Sheldon Warner, and the entire SALISES team. Many thanks to the UWI's Marketing and Communications Unit for the creation of the event's artwork and the broadcasting of this virtual forum. And I want to give special thanks to Ms. Josanne Green. Sincerest thanks to our chair, Mr. Lionel Remy, for extending his time, transitioning us smoothly within each of the presentations, ensuring that the time was managed throughout the event and also engaging in the discussions with regard to the questions. Thank you, viewers, for your attendance and participation by providing very constructive questions. And last but not least, a special thanks goes out to the Acting Director of SALISES, Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, for advocating yet another SALISES forum, which was very insightful, relevant, and stimulating. So again, I would like to say a sincere thank you and many blessings.
Okay, thank you very much for your vote of thanks. And it now falls upon me to call Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard to give us his closing remarks. And I'm sure in doing so, he would indicate that all of the contributions that have come out today would be chronicled and analyzed. And even those that didn't seem to get attention, which might have been integrated into other questions, they will be unraveled and put together again in a summary report. May I now invite Dr. St. Bernard to give his closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Chair. And it gives me great pleasure having witnessed today's proceedings to bring these closing remarks to everyone. I have to say again, I have been extremely pleased by the content of the webinar today. And as I expected, all of the panelists delivered in superlative terms. They are all experts in their own right, and they justified that claim to expert status by virtue of their presentations and the high quality of such presentations. In closing, I just think I need to make a few remarks, which I started during the period when Dr. Tull was having some difficulty. I did indicate that we would be hosting jointly with the NJAC a 50th anniversary conference on the Black Power movement in Trinidad and Tobago. And I have already sent the flyer in the chat. So you can check in the chat to see the flyer. You can go online on SALISES website and you will see reference to that conference. I also indicated that SALISES will be hosting its 6th SALISES Spotlight Lecture, which will be done by Dr. Priya Mohan, who is a senior fellow in SALISES St. Augustine. Priya is one of the outstanding young scholars who does work in the area of climate finance, and she will be speaking on a topic related to climate finance. That will be held next Friday, March the 4th, 10 a.m. Again, the same channels of communication and the same medium through which, her lecture will be beamed. And this is just the 6th in a series of lectures that SALISES has been hosting, where we have each of our fellows, giving what is tantamount to a keynote address based on the research that they have been doing, and especially, showcasing the relevance of such research to development issues in Trinidad and Tobago, the Caribbean, and the wider global context. So next Friday, Dr. Mohan will be at the crease, and I'm sure she will be a centurion. So that's one of the other events. I was also speaking to the 24th annual SALISES conference. SALISES is 25 years old, basically. And we have had 23 annual conferences. This year we will be hosting the 24th annual conference. This is a conference that is held every year, and this conference has assumed international status by virtue of the participation. The participation is international, and we are hoping that it's St. Augustine's turn at the crease. We are hosting the conference here on the St. Augustine campus. It will be a blended event, and we expect it to have a great turnout of presenters from the international arena, as well as regional and local presenters, whether academia or otherwise. So please look out for it. I have placed the flyer in the chat. And even as I am here in India at the moment, I have been, liaising with colleagues at this international meeting, and they have also shown interest in the conference and participating in it. So I really expect it to be a treat for those who would register and be part of that conference. So the spotlight lecture and the conference, both the flyers have been placed in the chat. The conference will be held on the 3rd to the 5th of May 2023. The Black Power conference that will be held on the 20th and 21st of April 2023. So those are some major events you can look out for in the immediate future, hosted by SALISES. You can go on SALISES website and you can see all of our forums. You can see a major conference we had on the rights of children and young people in Caribbean and Central America. We hosted that conference back in October, and all of the presentations are available on the website for one to witness. And all other events that we have hosted in SALISES, it's there. The only other thing I would want to say before I end is that our next forum will be held next month. I think we have been looking at March the 24th, 2023. And that one is going to be looking at spirituality, religiosity, and sustainable development in Caribbean societies. And obviously it fits neatly into the Lenten period. And I think, from a scholarly perspective, we have not really been placing enough attention on notions of spirituality, notions of religiosity, and how they come together in the entire development discourse to really complement, the lives and well-being of our citizens. Having said that, all I need to do is to thank all of the presenters who presented today, my colleague who chaired the session so ably, my former student who delivered the vote of thanks, of course, all of the folks who have supported the success of this event, including, the staff at SALISES. The staff at SALISES the staff is awesome, and they have really rallied to the cause. And if SALISES looks good, all credit is really due to the staff who come to the fore and really make all of this happen. So I want to, from deep within, thank all members of my staff, Ephraim, Francine, Tatiana, Elsa, Sheldon, you name it, and thank all of them for their sterling support. And of course, Josanne, who is a wonderful human being in terms of the contribution she has made from the marketing and communications end. So colleagues, viewers, the media, everyone, thank you for witnessing this, and we look forward to further installments of the SALISES Forum. Have a good day all, and thanks for joining us today.
Okay, goodbye all. And this session is now ended. And all the best to you, and thanks for participating. Okay, goodbye.